So, as we move forward here, we have a very insightful night of content for you. So, first off, we're going to start off with a wonderful panel. We're going to bring back up Chris DuPont from Galen Data. We are also going to bring up Scott Thielman, Chief Technology Officer at Product Creation Studios up in Seattle, and bring Ken Pilgrim from Emergo up as well. They will be chatting with Greenlight Guru's Tom Risch, about an original research project that we recently published called The State of Medical Device Product Development and Quality Management. This is a survey that we did of over 500 medical device industry professionals like yourself, which we'll be sharing the insights with you here tonight. Then after the panel, we have something else really special for you here tonight. The first ever live recording of the Global Medical Device Podcast powered by Greenlight Guru. Who here has heard of the Global Medical Device Podcast? Yeah, we got a couple in here. That means we need to get some new listeners. So if you haven't checked it out before, go on Apple Podcasts and search Global Medical Device Podcast. It's the #1 most downloaded podcast in the industry. Been downloaded over 300,000 times this year. So we're really excited. This will be the first time ever we are going to be doing a live recording, and that will be with our Tom Risch and Chris DuPont here after the panel. So without further ado, I'd like to bring up our panel here and your moderator, Tom Risch, for the night. Tom Risch is a medical device QMS consultant with Greenlight Guru. He has extensive experience in product development, working with both Fortune 500s like Medtronic all the way to small startups. He also understands quality systems and how to get certified to ISO 13485 and FDA's QSR because he's done it multiple times. He has a BS BME from Weldon School of Biomedical Engineering at Purdue. And so with that, Tom, take it away for us.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. I think in comparison, my credentials are very minimal compared to who we have up here, and that's why I'm very excited, because these are very impressive guys that have done a lot in the industry, and they're going to help us really dig into this report that we've done. And so to start off, we heard a little bit about some of their companies, and I just want to give them the opportunity to tell you a little bit more about their background personally. So, Chris.
My education, I have a master's in electrical engineering. I've done software all my professional life for NASA, Iridium, early stage medical device companies, Cyberonics. Background is class 3 neurostimulators, and then started a life science division doing custom software. And 3 years ago, we started Galen Data. And I've also built 2 quality management systems from scratch with all the electronics from CAPAs, equipment trackers, dot control systems, and I would never do that again. I would definitely use Greenlight. And full disclosure, half our customers are currently Greenlight customers, so it's an awesome product and a lot of efficiencies built in.
Yeah, I'm CTO of Product Creation Studio. My background is mechanical engineering. Started building this company 20 years ago. We're a development firm in Seattle that focuses on supporting innovators in the medtech space and beyond with services that they need to execute and bring their products to market. So we provide kind of this panoply of skills that we put together in teams to fill in for their needs. And we're typically working on products like you mentioned, neurostimulators. We've worked on a variety of cochlear implants, hearing support products, also ophthalmology products. And so our customers might be large groups like a Lilly or an Amgen or a Philips Medical, but also a lot of entrepreneurial folks, and the commonality is that they're always folks that want to bring something new to market that's going to make a difference for some patient population, and we fall in line as that's what we want to do too with the skills that we've learned in school and throughout our cycles of product development. And so we're just really passionate about putting the right teams at the right place to help our customers get their products to market and on market. And that's why quality in the device space is super important, and why I'm happy to be here discussing our experience with quality and quality management.
So I'm from the Canadian office of Emergo. I guess a bit of an import. I'm a chemical engineer, so I guess we're all engineers up here. I started in the medical device industry by extracting 2 metric tons of horseradish a day to get horseradish peroxidase for one of the early versions of the glucose test. Then my boss said, oh, our customer wants us to do something with ISO 9001. Someone figure out, what that means. So I put up my hand, and that was my journey to the dark side. From there, I worked with a radiopharmaceutical company, MDS Nordion, making radiopharmaceuticals. I worked for a small stent company, but I spent most of my career as director of an in vitro diagnostic company in Vancouver, making cardiac tests for cardiac markers, troponin, myoglobin, things like that. I've been with Emergo since 2012, and it's a very exciting company to work for because we deal with companies that are husband and wife, two people, and we work with the biggest companies on the planet. So the variety is challenging. The challenges that get brought to us can be daunting sometimes. Companies don't always come to us when they're starting up. Sometimes they come to us when they're in trouble and need some assistance. So again, specializing in medical devices is something that brings a good breadth of experience to us, and we hope to be able to share that today, and we share that our clients value from that as well.
Thank you, and I know many of you received that State of the Medical Device report that you have there, and we're really going to dive into that. One thing I did want to do before we do that, though, is just kind of get the lay of the land and see who we have in the room. So if you would consider yourself to be a quality professional, please raise your hand. And what about regulatory? And then product development? Great. So got a big mix, a lot of technical people. So when Nick and our marketing team came to us and said, we have this report, we have a lot of data, I wasn't too sure what to think because I know what marketing data looks like compared to engineering data. So many of you have probably worked with spreadsheets that have many tabs full of numbers and everything. And when I saw this report, the first thing I thought is it looks a little marketing to me. A lot of pictures, a lot of colors. But once I really started to dig into it, I really found a lot of interesting things that was really supporting what we try to do at Greenlight. And I know these guys live by the same mantra, so I'm excited to dig into that. And one of the very first things that popped out in my mind was how many companies that consider themselves highly competitive, almost 50%, they say that they use quality as a strategic asset. And I know, Ken, one thing that you do is you go and help people set up quality systems. I'm just curious, how do you help them determine that that is a strategic asset?
And it's funny you say that. I had this conversation just this week with a client where they were putting a quality system in a bit late in their product development cycle, and a lot of lot of new hires from different industries, not from medical device. So especially at the executive management as well. So understanding that the quality system is an asset in the company, not a liability. You can use it as a gateway to success rather than a barrier to success. But it has to be done sensibly. It has to be done with forethought. It has to be done with planning. Companies need to invest in their quality systems as much, if not more sometimes, than they invest in their products and their product development and other areas of the operation. You need to be successful as a system. It's a quality system, and that includes all the other areas. So, making sure that you're putting in the systems that fit your business, and use the strengths of your people to develop those.
Yeah, and Scott, I know you're focused on product development primarily, and sometimes product development engineers don't always see eye to eye with the quality people. And how do you build a culture of quality at your company?
Well, the short answer, I think it needs to come from the top. There's a few other interesting layers there. I think there's having been in the industry for about 20 years now, there's kind of a traditional viewpoint that I used to see a lot, where it's like, hey, there's something called V&V, and we put that in a box at the end of the product, and that's when quality really gets its sway and has input, and then we have to run around and do what they say. That has for fairly obvious reasons, probably to many people, resulted, and the reasons behind that, the reasons that has even in the last few years, I've had people come in with that very traditionalist viewpoint into our company and talk about programs where that's how we're going to run it, is because it seems like it's more efficient. It seems it's tempting to say, oh well, that kind of frees us up to work maybe with fewer constraints from our quality system. We're not having to track all that risk right now, and we'll put that in the documents later on. And pretty much inevitably, what you see is that train crashes, and the things get products have to be patched once you start looking comprehensively at what the requirements were and applying all the regulation and how are we going to demonstrate that we're actually meeting these functional needs and these safety needs. And so it's pretty clear that we need to kind of go slow to go fast a little bit, and that's the thing that's not natural to us engineers. We want to get in there and solve a problem right now, and there's a pace to doing these things where you want to we split these problems up into steps and stages for a reason, because in the early stages we want to be focused on making sure we've had all the inputs lined up and categorized and ready to go, and we've understood, because those are going to then feed into our analysis of risk and where we put our time in terms of mitigating those risks. So all that has to be done before we move through these steps. But the natural reaction for engineers can be, hey, let's run, and so I think it has to come from the top, where it's like, hey guys, I've watched this enough. It's not going to work so well. Like, what we need to do is look at best practices, look at things we can follow that are going to have us approach a problem and approach the product development process in a sensible way.
Yeah, I think coming from the top is huge. I see so many companies where they just don't have the buy-in from the top, and the people that are actually doing the work feel like they have nobody backing them, and that's a bad spot to be in. And I know, Chris, you've built 2 quality systems, you said. You're the CEO. How did you decide that, this is what we're going to do early on?
So there's a practical concept or reason is, I think ISO 1345 and all the standards, at least for 1345, 85% of the standard is just good common sense. It's good project management. So when you have written procedures, you use those procedures to guide your corporation and how you want to do business. But more importantly, we live in the startup capital of the world right now, right? This is the hotbed. Medical device is different from your consumer apps, in that the quality management system is key to everything you do with a medical device. And so most big medical device companies, and you can criticize me a little bit, but they don't innovate as much. They buy the little medical device companies that do all the innovation. And once you start a medical device, no matter what it is, once you cross that boundary of class 1 or class 2, if you have a poor management or poor quality management system, you have a poor product. And so if your goal is to be acquired 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now, and your quality management system is lacking, it's going to make it, just from a practical point of view, it's going to make a different sell. It'll make a difficult sell. And so we've heard a VP of Medtronic say that they had the great product, but their quality management system was lacking. They passed on it. And so it's just common sense. Now, from practice, when we filed our corporation documents and formation documents with the state of Delaware to become a Corp C, we also started writing our SOPs and laying the groundwork for our quality management system, and we were ISO 1345 within a year of forming Galen. So I do agree it comes from the top. It's 85% of the standard is common sense, and it's just good engineering and project management.
Yeah, well, one interesting thing that always comes up is budget, and how do we budget for a quality system? I know a lot of times you have a very detailed project timeline, project budget. A lot of companies that I work with don't even allocate any money for quality. And I guess I'm just curious, by a show of hands, do your companies allocate? Does it have a budget for quality systems? Good amount. And just curious to get your thoughts, Ken, maybe on that topic.
So when we work with companies early on to put quality management systems in place, we don't just kind of drop a bunch of documents in their laps and walk away. We don't sell our procedures. We've refused to do that because it doesn't add value. We work with a company to implement, And we also look to see, it has to also align with the regulatory strategy. When do they need their system in place? When do they need QSR compliance? When do they need ISO registration? When do they need, MDSAP for Canada or Brazil or getting into Japan? So, looking at, when do they need to add on to their quality system and giving, aligning with what those future needs are and the growth as well. So, it might be that, right from the get-go, a lot of companies want to start out paper-based because they're more comfortable with that. But at a certain point, we tell them that, you're going to be generating enough data that it's going to be unmanageable. So you need to deal with the data, and perhaps at the same time, you take all of your information and package it up into a system that has the data, has the procedures, has the records, and also recognizing that one of the really critical audiences for all this information are the auditors and the regulators. So having the information available to make it auditable and understandable is as important as making it function internally, is also ensuring that it's functional for those external viewers of that information, whether it's perhaps potential partners or acquisitions, whether it's regulators, whether it's customer audits that you're getting. You need to, we communicate that, that those are eventual audiences that you can start considering now, and then grow in a sensible manner and add on those tools when it makes sense, and add on the proper tools at the right time.
Yeah, I think that the data thing was very eye-opening to me as well, because it said 2/3 of people struggle to find reliable data. And you hear stories all the time about making decisions based on, you have a complaint in the field and you're trying to decide if you need to change the design or rework some of your product, and people are just making these decisions blindly. And it blows my mind. And Chris, I don't know if you have any thoughts on the type of data that you collect as part of your quality system to help make decisions.
It depends on the stage. When I worked for a fairly large medical device company, we did trend analysis. We had the resources, and for complaints, we had 3 or 4 PhD statisticians on board. Small medical device companies such as Galen, we can't support that. But some of the trend analysis we look at is how long does it take to sign off a document? How often does documents get rejected? Do you have the tools? I would never, ever do a paper system again. I'm a fully believer in electronic systems. A lot of companies are geographically dispersed, and so being able to look at requirements. And then I think one of the values that efficiencies is we're software, so requirements are very, very important to us. And so one of the things I like about the Greenlight tool is it allows you to manage your requirements at what I call the atomic level and not the document level. And when you deal with 300 or 400 requirements at a time for a product, it's a very efficient use. And we do track, how long does it take for a requirement to get signed off, and the rejection requirements. Software bugs, we look on how many bugs do you have in a sprint or a cycle, how many bugs per sprint, how long does it take to remedy a bug. So there's lots of data, and we're just software. For mechanicals, you have even more data to collect.
Yeah, definitely. I think data, a lot of times when people come to me and say, what data should I be reviewing, they think of complaints, CAPAs, nonconformances, those sorts of things. As a product development engineer, I always struggled to figure out what types of things, like tracking requirements is a great one. And Scott, I don't know, do you have any other insight on other things a development engineer could track?
Well, a lot of it is, verification activities to demonstrate that you're meeting those requirements with the design that you're putting forth, and those might be just simple design reviews that are done kind of over the shoulder. There might be more formal design reviews. It might be an analysis that's being run to show how a decision was made. Should all be documented somewhere and be in a record. And I would add, after looking at the data report, at the risk of losing confidence, and it was a little bit of sigh of relief. I was like, other people are struggling with this too, because we're kind of always at the whim. We're a service provider, so we are. I mean, we can provide guidance like Murgo does too. It sounds like he gave a great example of like how you should be thinking about strategically about your quality system. But once we've set up a contract, sometimes the client might change. We had a project recently where they said, okay, well, just develop the firmware to a point where we can deploy this into this IRB clinical study. And halfway through, there was a change of the guard within their group and said, no, we get this ready to be fully compliant with IEC 62304 and ready for market. And we had to go back in and say, hey, we're working on this contract, we're not aligned with where the team wants to go now, and we had to kind of do refactoring on our side. They had to do refactoring on their side to regain alignment. And so for us, we kind of have to go back up the chain to the client and say, hey, we need more. We can tell them the right thing to do is to spend more time. We're going to generate more records. We're going to do more verification activities. It's going to lead to a heavier dose of document output and data output. But we're doing it for the good. Unfortunately, it takes more time and money. And so we have these. It's the challenge for a service group where we want to be, since we're in the business product development, we want to have the best tools and the best processes and the best people on the staff in the world, bar none. The reality is we're mostly spending time doing client work, and again, we have to like find times to intentionally say, hey, our system says we need to continually improve. Pull your head up and look at what's working, what's not. Self-evaluate and make changes to the system to improve it. It's hard in a small services organization, and I mean, I'm proud that we do it, but it's also an admission that it's a struggle to be there, and we're never quite the asymptotically approach. We're never quite where we wish we were, and then these MDRs and things the bar keeps moving up. So it's a challenge.
Yeah, definitely. I think where I was, the management review specifically was more a checkbox activity where we just kind of wrote stuff down and signed off on it. And Ken, I know we talked a little bit about how you can use management reviews better to collect that data. What are some tips you have maybe on how to better utilize those meetings instead of just making them sign the paper every quarter?
Yeah, there's a few kind of soapbox topics that we normally jump on top of when we're putting quality systems together. One is management review, another one is risk management, another one is CAPA, and should be no surprise to a lot of people. But for management review, you've got your senior people, you've got a lot of data that's being generated, you have all your senior people in a room, and you're looking at information and you're making decisions. So, you have that much horsepower put in a room, make it worth it, and that's where getting the right data is critical. A lot of times, we're doing audits and we're looking at the information that's being provided, and it's just the quality group puts some numbers together and puts it on screen, and everybody nods, and then they finish, and then they go, back to their regular work. I go, well, what decisions did you make? So, some of the key things that I normally tell companies to do is, whatever your company's critical metrics are, that's what you're presenting, but also within each department. And there's a section in the standard, ISO standard, that says part of your management review is recommendations for improvement. And 90% of what we see is it's right at the end of the meeting. Someone says, okay, and we've done the presentation, any recommendations for improvement? Everybody's been sitting for 5 hours and they're like,
Better coffee.
Nope. So what we advise clients is two things. One, each section of the management review is presented by the owner, not by quality. Quality can facilitate, quality can be the MC, and quality can help put the information together, but each department owner owns the data that they're presenting. Each department owner brings their recommendations for improvement to their section. So they say, this is my data, this is what it's saying, this is where we need help, this is my recommendations for improvement, and then the executive team can decide whether or not they're gonna put resources to help fix those problems. And we find that makes those meetings much more meaningful, much more actionable, and certainly you get all the involvement and buy-in across the board. So that's normally what we recommend.
Yeah, I know with those management review meetings, they always just seemed like such a waste of time. And I think about trying to be audit ready. Those seems like very good times where you would know that you are going to be audit ready. A lot of times when you know an audit's coming up, you're going to be scrambling for 3 or 4 weeks when you should have been doing things throughout. And so one thing, just curious, as you built your QMS, Chris, what are ways that you thought about trying to be audit ready at all times?
Well, let's talk about management review. And I understand it's a checkbox, and my role is different now. I'm on the receiving end of these management reviews, but when I used to give them, I looked at it a little differently. It was my opportunity to communicate to executive management the state of the corporation, or at least my department. And I looked at it that way, and we took it very seriously. And we, one company we did a management review every quarter because it was large enough, and it was really a communication tool. And you should put effort into it. And again, if you look at it as a tool to communicate the state and issues and opportunities for improvement, I think there's a real opportunity for a management review. And then as far as building the quality management system, I just took a call this morning from a physician that has an idea. And I get this question a lot, and I'm sure you guys do, is when is it the right time to put in a management system? And the very first thing I said is whatever you, and I still get this. I'm curious if you guys get this question. There are some regulatory consultants out there that are still pushing a paper system. Do you guys see that at all? Anybody pushing paper systems?
Yeah, we hear about it.
Yeah. It's crazy. If any of you guys are out there starting a quality management system, it's okay to manage paper electronically within the system, but doing ink signatures is just crazy in today's world. And I'm still flabbergasted by some people out there still pushing it. But I wouldn't say start a quality management system from the very first day, because it does add cost and overhead. But the sooner you can put one in place, the better off you'll be, the better run your organization will be, and in the end, the better product you will have. I firmly believe that.
Yeah, the process, especially from a product development standpoint, is usually, in my mind, what dictates when do we need this QMS in place. I mean, if we're going to be doing a lot of product development work that we want to leverage as part of a submission, we probably need that QMS in place. And I'm just curious, Scott, to hear a little bit more about your product development process. I know you said you have a process that you use for all your products, not just medical devices. The medical devices might have a little bit more information in there, but just speak to the benefits of having a good product development process.
First of all, I have to admit, and then I'm going to get beat up probably, our system is still paper-based technically with PDF. But there's a reason for appropriateness there, at least for the time being. We've built this. We've invested in the people around our development process. We're a little bit unusual in that we're a services group that, we, to some degree, our QMS is partly a badge of honor to the groups from the outside looking in, going, well, okay, good, you guys know what you're doing. You're going to use our system though, right? Because we don't care about your system when push comes to shove, and the output from what you do is going to go roll back into our system. We do have some groups that go, yeah, our system is not fully baked. You please, let's use yours as much as we can, and hopefully we'll meet at the end when you're getting close to your DHF and design master records and handoff, and we'll be able to intake it into our system. So ours was built with this kind of lovingly crafted around the ISO 13485, the parts of design control that makes sense for a service organization like ours, and we really had to build this out in a way. And so we've got our quality management rep, Marin, has done that over the last 4 or 5 years, and we just went through our third quality audit with our third year quality audit, which is kind of a dig deep year where they go in and only a few minor findings. So it's looking pretty good. But and to some degree, because of that relationship with the clients, and we track this, the number of records in the system. Early on, it was just kind of trickling in, and now it's starting to ramp up more dramatically. So don't sick Connor on me yet, but it's probably we're kind of getting that place where we need to start looking at new systems in the coming years, and how are we going to do this as the number of records go up, and also as another way we get away with it is typically companies are bringing us a chunk of work, and we're doing it mostly geographically in Seattle for the most part, and so we can somewhat control that our aspect of it before handing it off. What was the rest of the question? Oh, it was. I don't know if I got. Yes. Some of our work is outside of the medical device space, and actually, that was one of the kind of unexpected things. We decided we need to invest in this, and largely for that marketing badge of honor I was talking about, where it's like we need to have that to compete, and we want to show that we're good process. As we started looking into it, everything we saw was like, this is good for the business. We don't want to be doing work that's not controlled, not traceable, not we're not mitigating risks, and like this is all good process. So we look to, as we built our system, there's parts that are intentionally crafted to show that we meet are compliant with the ISO standards. There's parts that are just like good business sense place that create housings for good work instructions, good procedures that we normally do in all of our work. And so to some degree we have things just fall into different buckets. So we don't always apply all the aspects of the system that we do when it's a medical device, but we have parts of it that apply to every product, and we use it as a source to track in those quality management meetings, to track the entire quality of the workflow going through our house. And that's been pretty revolutionary for a small group like ours, and so to some degree, I think we're now ready to start looking at, now does a tool make sense? Because before it's like, sure, you can talk tools, but tools don't. I've seen tools, tools don't drive the culture and the intention. They just help you scale in most business tools, and I think that's what where Greenlight Guru helps. But so.
Yeah, I think when I was first in the industry, a lot of my friends dropped out of the medical device because they said it's too much paperwork. I'm not doing any design work. I'm just doing paperwork all the time. And it really gets you thinking. And we have a lot of customers that say, I don't want to start this early. I don't think I need to do this yet. Ken, how do you convince people at that stage that it's really going to help them and it's not just getting in their way?
Usually horror stories can help. And also, Emergo is 1345 registered because we have authorized rep services that require that. So as a service company as well, some of the paradigms that for risk management, for example, we call it a risk register, but we gauge risk across our service offerings, and it's something fairly recently that we matured and found it valuable because it's always a bit of discovery. When you do risk management well, you discover things you didn't know before. When you do risk management poorly, you don't get any payback from it. So a bit of a sidebar on that. For getting quality systems in early, often the question is related to the FDA. You might need to put design control in last week, because the FDA expects you to be developing this device under design control. So you should maybe look at putting those systems in now and start to generate the records and data that you're eventually going to need to demonstrate that the product was designed under design control, and also developing the objective evidence that is eventually going to support a submission. We have had projects, maybe others have had as well, that we've had to rebuild design history files, and it's not a lot of fun. You're piecing together kind of lips and noses from information from product development, sometimes from sales and marketing and other areas. Sometimes it's successful, other times it isn't. And when it isn't, it's not a good day for the client, unfortunately. So.
Definitely. I spent 2 years on a DHF remediation project, and I was trying to justify why we didn't need to do testing on a product that was released in the 80s. So that was not fun. But
Nobody did testing in the 80s, right?
Yeah, it was, the predicate was out there, so it's good to go. Risk, you brought up risk. I think that's a big topic, obviously. Risk for your product, risk for in the QMS itself. And I know the data in here said 43% of the people who responded said they don't feel like they have enough information to adequately assess risk, which is quite scary. And so when I think about risk, from my experience, we got in a room, we argued for 3 hours about probability, severity values the last week of the project, and we signed it off. And that's obviously not the way to do it. Chris, how do you, I'm curious to know, do you think of your risks before you start thinking of the design inputs, or do you think of your design and let those drive the risks, or how does that look?
I'm a big fan of preliminary risk analysis. You sit down and at design phase, you try to figure out how this device is going to fail. And there's different ways to do risk analysis. I think it's more important that you do it because the engineering thinking process of how your device will fail actually needs to be in the front end. It goes into design and architecture, and then you come back and revisit it, throughout the project. So we usually do a preliminary risk analysis, then somewhere in the middle we reassess, and then at the end you reassess again. So again, it doesn't have to be all encompassing. I mean, if you get started, you'll start to turn over those rocks and learn things that you don't know sooner than later.
Yeah, I think this is an important topic, so I'm curious, Scott, how risk is involved in your process.
Yeah, and I recognize some of the things Chris was just saying. I mean, that we prefer that to a preliminary is the way we look at things often. But even I can step maybe more interesting even before that. Our company often gets involved with projects that are really in the well planted in the feasibility stage. We often help clients understand that, hey, you're in a phase that as we've talked in the intake meetings, it's clear that there's one or a couple of risks that are basically showstoppers, where if you can't demonstrate some level of feasibility or understanding that reduces those risks, it maybe doesn't make sense to go on and categorize all the holistic risks because that's going to be a big effort that is probably not going to go anywhere. And so we call those phase 0. And to some degree, the feasibility FDA looks at, well, okay, you do whatever you want in feasibility. But it's kind of this chicken and egg thing where okay, if we're totally free of that, we can do whatever we want. Are we not looking at enough holistically? Are we missing some other risk that might be important? So maybe a light brush on kind of a semi-holistic preliminary hazards analysis can help point out, like, here's this big risk either in technical feasibility or in maybe in the user adoption, user experience, or even in the business model. There might be IP out there, there might be competitors out there that are going to drive you in a certain way, and so we look at doing those early stage feasibility studies where we can do it at least a little more unburdened from a comprehensive collection of all the inputs, and that output from that ends up becoming an input into the more traditional fully under the QMS process of development.
Yeah, and last thing on risk before we open up to some questions from the audience, but people seem to understand risk of the product fairly well. ISO 1345 2016 talked a lot about risk throughout your QMS. Speak a little bit about what that means exactly.
So, and that's a good point. A lot of procedures that we see when we go into companies that have some legacy quality system in place, their risk management only talks about product risk. So, in order to, bring it up to compliance, we need to broaden the thought about risk across the organization as applicable. So, risk should be considered, of course, in change control. Assess the risk to the quality system and assess the risk to the product as applicable. Same thing for corrective actions. Same thing for nonconformances, for audits. You apply a risk-based approach. I wish I would give out shirts when we go into companies to say, let's think of this from a risk-based approach and just make that part of the mantra of the system. Because not only then are you thinking about risk internally and for the product, but you're also categorizing and prioritizing what's important, right? So in each system that you're looking at, prioritize the bang for the buck. So, you know, the important kappas should float to the top. The important nonconformances should float to the top. The design changes that have the highest risk should get the most look and have the most resources and be prioritized. So, you know, in all the systems that, that have considerations of risk, you know, we get clients to think about how do you want to categorize risk in your supplier management? How you want to rate suppliers? You know, what's a critical supplier to you? What's a critical service provider to you? And think about that, you know, in context of, you know, bring the product up where you have to and consider, you know, what risk to the product based on what products you have, but also risk to the process as well. In order to be efficient and in order that you spend the time on the important things at the same time. The other important thing to think about risk is that a lot of companies think, you know, we have risk as a requirement in the procedures that we can provide to companies as templates. So if there's preliminary risk analysis is in there. So if they don't want to do it, they're going to have to take it out, and we'll have a discussion about that. But you know, risk doesn't stop when the product hits the market. You know, and that's one thing about the new European system. You know, risk is you know, in a triad with your clinical evidence and your post-market surveillance. You know, these systems talk to each other. What you're learning from the marketplace should feed back into your risk management system. What you learn from the marketplace can be then recognized in your clinical evaluation reports. You know, what clinical risks are you learning about through your post-market surveillance or any post-market studies that you're doing. So your risk management file needs to be a living, breathing file that you're updating and learning from. Often where we look at companies' complaint systems and we see a whole bunch of complaints on a certain topic. And you go, well, that's happening a lot. What does your risk management file say? Oh, 1 in a million. Well, you got about 1 in 300. So, you know, what's up? So, you know, obviously, you know, the information is not flowing. No one's taking that information and getting it into the risk management system. You know, at Emergo, we have our management review meeting on Monday. So the output from that, I'm going to look at and consider updates to our risk management system, because, you know, what are we going to learn about, you know, the feedback we're getting from our clients, and, you know, what did we think we were going to have based on risk management, and it needs to be updated, it needs to be reviewed. So, you know, get full circle to data management. You know, the data needs to flow. The data needs to be easily available, so you can look at your, you know, your adverse events, you know, recalls, complaints, post-market data, and, you know, that needs to be reviewed against your risk management and coordinated. So it has to be updated. You might identify new risks. You might identify different probabilities, maybe even new severities. So it needs to be living and breathing and part of the overall system, not just one and done.
Thank you. And I think we have a few minutes for anyone that has any questions for anyone up here. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about, you know, when you say the system, the quality management software is designed exclusively for medical devices. Okay, so I just wanted to understand, like, when you say the quality management software is designed exclusively for medical devices companies, so what are the unique capabilities of that system which is exclusive for medical device? I mean, what are you talking about in terms of either design control process or design control traceability metrics, or something which could be, you know, I just want to understand, you know, what's the difference versus just a, you know, any QMS system, maybe like Agile from Oracle, or what's the difference we're talking here?
Yeah, great question. So for Greenlight Guru specifically, we are out of the box for medical devices. What we mean by that is we fully validate the software and provide it to you for use on day one, essentially. And we've got a design control workflow that gives you the ability to build a design control matrix. So it has user needs through design validations. You link them together according to definitions. You can do design reviews. The design reviews ensure that you have an independent reviewer on there. We have risk. You can set up a matrix based off of ISO 14971, and then that all comes together into an electronic DHF. So from design and risk side, we have that. In document management, we have Part 11 compliance signatures, And then we've built out some post-market workflows as well for CAPAs that go through investigation, through root cause, through actions.
Can you talk a little bit about the post-market systems, apart from CAPA or these things? Do you do the data analysis from complaints perspective?
And we can speak a little bit more about the specifics after, but we basically allow you, the vehicle, to assign tasks, due dates to people to make sure it's all in one spot. And somebody will catch you after to talk a little bit more. Thank you.
This question is for Chris. So do I understand you have a IoT platform for connected medical device?
Yes. Yeah, you can think of it as MD-IoT, medical device for the Internet of Things, yes.
And how is it different from any other IoT devices?
That's a great question. So I'm a design engineer, and I have decided to connect my medical device to a cloud. I could go out and buy a consumer platform that connects your coffee pot, your thermostat, to the cloud. But as a medical device engineer, I need to be able to verify and validate the operation. I need to know that that tool was built to be used and consumed by a medical device. It's not, and there's no reason why it should. And there's cost and overhead to do that. So from the get-go, Galen Data is purpose-built and hyper-focused on the medical device industry. So how do I qualify that? One is we're ISO 13485 certified. We also follow the RIS standard, 14971, and then there's a medical device software standard, 62304, and a half other dozen guidance documents and everything. We can claim compliance. And in medical device, when you use a tool such as dot control, you have to show that you verified that tool. And so that's what Galen has done. And so if I have to know the tools I use, and that's one of the advantages of Greenlight Guru, is I just can't go out and buy an electronic documentation system with knowing that there's no verification. And so one of the things, the value propositions that Greenlight gives you, you know that tool has been built and certified. Galen is no different. Galen is exactly the same way. It's a great question. Thank you.
Hi, Howard Look from Tide Pool. We make a software-only medical device. We're here in the heart of Silicon Valley. Companies that are successful here are really good at iterating quickly. Some companies push software every single day, if not every single hour, out to their devices and out to the cloud. I'm wondering what best practices you all have seen that allow software as medical device companies to follow some of those same agile, iterative best practices and get software out every day or every week instead of every quarter or every year.
All right, so most folks in here probably know that the medical device design cycle is probably 2 to 3 years in real life. You're seeing a push for agile sprints and very rapid development cycles. The FDA in the past would push the waterfall process, and then what we did is we would convert that to something called an iterative process. I've been involved with some companies that would do these very rapid, and I will say right now, in medical device software, you can use any type of software development process. But what you must do is make sure that when you do those rapid development cycles is that your documents, your design documents have to stay up. We got involved with a company that just instituted Agile, and what an Agile software process is in a perfect world, you sit down and you try to figure out all your requirements beforehand. In reality, that's very hard to do. And so they developed these very quick iterative software development processes where you take a chunk every 2 weeks, and another chunk, and another chunk, and another chunk. What happens is the software development team gets ahead of the documentation. And all of a sudden, you have misbranded product. You have adulterated product because your designs are no longer documented because the overhead to keep up with those rapid development cycles falls back. You got schedule pressure. We got to get the product out. Well, we don't need the requirements. We don't need to update the requirements because we don't have time. And so that's why I'm a big advocate of the Greenlight tool and electronic tools in general, because if you're going to use a rapid software development cycle, which we do, you have to have the tools to keep up with that pace. You have to approve requirements. You have to get them approved by regulatory, clinical, manufacturing, regulatory. And if you don't do that, you're at risk. Does that make sense?
Yes, I'm still looking for best practices. So using Greenlight Guru, that's awesome.
So the best practices is first implement for a medical device, fall under the governance of 1345 and 62304. So if you follow those two standards, and then in my case, we have a design control process. Our design control process documents step by step how we develop the software, from planning to architecture to preliminary risk analysis to code reviews to sprints. That's all documented as best practices in adherence with and 14971. All those standards have to be mapped. And not only that, we take those clauses of those standards and we map those into our SOPs or design control processes. And then we have a trace matrix that shows that we're compliant with all that. Was that a better answer?
Yes, we do that too. Yeah. And sometimes it's also a decision that you make. I have one client that just decided that they couldn't go any faster than every 2 weeks. So they went to a 2-week cycle. They set up their system so that they could manage that. Maybe in the future they can go faster, but they had to put the brakes on a little bit because they couldn't keep up.
So we were auditing, and I don't like auditing other companies. It's difficult. I don't like building DHFs after the project is developed, but I think we've all done it to some degree. But there's a term that I was introduced to about 5, and this is after being in the business for 15, 20 years. There's a term called technical debt. And I learned that term about 5 or 6 years ago, and what is this technical debt? It's because they were going so fast, they had over 300 defects in their product because of technical debt, but none of their documentation was kept up. And so when you had a defect, you could never trace it back to a requirement that says the software should do this, this, and that. And so you just got to be careful. And medical device is different. You have to document what you do and do what you document. As long as you follow those two simple guidelines, you'll be okay.
And there is a standard TIR 45 for agile implementation in medical device.
And borrowing from the hardware space, where we've never been able to iterate as fast as we want. Look for domains that you can evaluate. Usually, you're trying to do those rapid iterations because you want to learn something about the customer interaction, the experience, and otherwise, why would you? If everything was perfect, you wouldn't make these changes. But you're trying to adapt and learn something. So can you learn in another domain that's not maybe on market? So we do things like small localized controlled user testing, test under IRB, establish ways that we can expose the thing in a simulation.
All right. Unfortunately, we're out of time tonight, or for right now, for the panel. These guys will be sticking around. We'll have a little bit of networking after the podcast as well, so be sure to grab them. I'm sure they'll be willing to answer your question. So let's give it up for this panel. Thank you, Chris, Ken, Scott, and Tom.